Welcome back to day one of the Nature for Life Hub. As you are joining us today from around the world, don't forget to tweet with the hashtag Nature for Life to engage in the conversation. Now, we have the great pleasure of hearing from a panel of experts and medical practitioners on the topic of nature for health and security, securing local health and security, and preventing the next pandemic. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Musonda Mumba, and I'm streaming from Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm going to be the moderator for this incredible panel and session entitled Nature for Health and Security. What a moment in our human history. We have literally been brought down to a minimum by this microscopic organism in the form of a virus that has stopped everything and life as we know it. And the pandemic has changed our dynamic and the way we live and the way we exist within our communities. Then there's a backstory to that. The story is that nature really is the key and is the answer to how we live and how we thrive and how we exist on this planet. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the keynote speaker, whom most of you know around the world, Dr. David Nabarro, who's going to be giving us a keynote. He is not only the special envoy for COVID-19 with WHO, World Health Organization, he is also the strategic director for an organization called 4SD, which stands for Skill Systems and Synergies for Sustainable Development. Brilliant mind, a systems thinker, and somebody who's been advocating for the fact that we need to be pandemic ready and also climate resilient. So Dr. Nabarro, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Musonda. First of all, as always, checking that the technology works and that I can be heard and seen. And I'm sure you'll contact me very quickly if there's anything wrong. Secondly, I've got my time clear. There's nothing more challenging in these kinds of things when you're in your position, Musonda, and somebody goes on longer than they should. But you know, I could go on connecting with you all for hours on this. What a really important subject it is, and how beautifully it's been framed. Nature for life. It's about the connection between the living systems on our earth, on which we all depend for our well-being. And these living systems are in so many different areas. They're to do with insect life. They're to do with plants, to do with animals, and of course to do with humans. And indeed, as Musonda just implied, to do with viruses. And so what I want to do is to share with you some of the feelings amongst the senior leaders in the World Health Organization about the vital connections between natural systems and humanity. The notion that natural systems and humanity in harmony is the way to go, and that without a real revaluation of the importance that we give as humanity to nature, the prospects for a really sustainable and vibrant future for all of us is going to be so tough. So my slogan for this presentation is, let's revalue nature together in order to contribute to a viable, sustainable, and equitable future for all of humanity, not just for now, but in the generation, say, of my children, of their children, and of their children, and 7 generations to come. Let's try to get it right, because without that, it will be difficult. I was fortunate. I worked with some of you who are in this program today on a summit that was organized by the Secretary General of the United Nations in September last year. And our theme was nature-based solutions in climate action. And I remember the one thing that came out of those discussions so strongly was we must all value nature better. And we learned this from so many brilliant speakers, so many participants, government ministers, business leaders, civil society actors, university heads, academics from all over the world, just reminding us that humanity's had a very exciting time during the last 3 or 4 centuries, establishing lots of new technologies and ways of working and ways of being. But in the process, it does look as though we've managed to slightly undervalue nature, and that's an understatement. We've really undervalued nature to a very large extent. And so revaluing nature for the sake of the future of humanity is absolutely key. Let me take you on a short walk through a document that the World Health Organization produced earlier this year. It was called Prescriptions for a Healthy Green Recovery. It was designed to focus our minds as we go through COVID and come to terms with it on what are the things that we should all be thinking about as we move through this early stage of coming to terms with this virus, and we learn to live with this virus as part of our natural ecosystems. What are the things that might be prescriptions for a healthy green recovery? I'll just list them out and then I'll stop quite quickly because there's so many important speeches coming next. Number 1, protect and preserve the source of human life and human health, nature. Let's just everybody use that slogan. I'm going further. I'm going to say protect, preserve, and revalue the source of human life and health, which is nature. Every one of us, we should almost, if we were in a big meeting and it was a session and you could be close to me and I could be close to me, I'd invite you all to stand up on your chairs and shout loudly, let's protect and preserve and revalue the source of human health and life, nature, and have that sort of slogan and be walking around with it, because we're all standing up for nature and we see the importance of nature for life. Number 2, invest in essential services, from water and sanitation to clean energy, in everything to do with health, and value it. If we're bringing in the water, let's use it carefully, collecting it from the roofs and preserving it. If we're having sanitation, let's keep it clean and working well. If we're having energy, let's make sure it's renewable, but let's make sure that we get a natural approach to essential services in all our healthcare facilities. Number 3, let's make sure that in every health facility, we are working for clean energy and make sure that that's there everywhere. You know, we really should not be using energy that contributes to greenhouse gases in our facilities. Number 4, let's promote healthy, sustainable food systems that respect nature and that contribute to the functioning of ecosystems. We should get food right for human nutrition, for health, for making certain that ecosystems are preserved, and also for climate action, because if we get food wrong, it does bad. And there's a food summit coming up in 2021. Let's work for that. Number 5, let's build cities that are healthy, livable, and sustainable. Let's make certain that a city is a place where nature and people meet, and there's a focus on health and well-being. And number 6, Let's stop using taxpayers' money to fund activities that pollute and destroy nature. Let's instead ensure that all of taxpayers' money, subsidies and all the rest, is pro-nature and is helping us to move forward. If we do that, then we will find ourselves creating a natural life that is good for people, good for the planet, and that prevents there being more nasty things happening like zoonotic diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the chance to contribute. And on behalf of all of us linked to health, we're so pleased that in this wonderful multi-day event, you are linking nature to life and health and revaluing nature for the good of all. Thank you.
Dr. Navarro, that was really inspiring. We must value nature together. That is really the key. And as you rightly said, let's try to get it right. Now, what's exciting is that this particular event is a 3-session event. So I'm going to start with the first panel that will be focusing on nature for preventing the next pandemic. How do we prevent this next pandemic? We have a brilliant panel with His Excellency Minister Lee White from the government of Gabon, and he's the Minister of Water, Forest, the Sea, and Environment, charged with land use planning. And we also do have the President of EcoHealth Alliance, Peter Dashak, who is also joining us from the United States. We also have Christian Waltzer, who is the Executive Director of Global Health Wildlife, the Wildlife Conservation Society. And lastly, but not the least, of course, we do have Mr. Qatar Roberts, who's the President and CEO of World Wildlife Fund, where I used to work at WWF US. Welcome on board. I really would like to start with you, Minister Lee. Gabon, beautiful country, except I've never been. But I am from part of the Congo Basin. I'm originally from Zambia. Now, Gabon lies within the Congo Basin, and I know that you've been really instrumental in sort of challenging and also advocating for issues related to nature-based solutions. But in this context of pandemics and preventing the next pandemic, how is Gabon trying to minimize this risk of zoonosis?
Well, thank you, and hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you all on this SDG Nature for Life event to talk about the importance of nature and health. The Global Assessment Report published in 2019 highlighted the fact that we are experiencing an unprecedented worldwide wave of natural destruction and that a corresponding mass extinction event is well underway. Our climate scientists tell us with more and more urgency that we are rapidly approaching a tipping point, beyond which a 1.5 or a 2 degree world will be a distant memory. The recent natural disasters we've experienced are some of the increasingly alarming signals that nature has been sending us for years. And now the COVID-19 pandemic, which seems to be the product of an unnatural meeting between a bat and a pangolin in a wet market in China, is a wake-up call for the urgent need to change our relationship with nature by adopting a holistic approach to the major climate, biodiversity, environmental, and health challenges we face today. We need to nurture, not aggress nature. We need to live and breathe the Sustainable Development Goals and use them to guide how we develop responsibly. We need to fashion a COVID-19 recovery strategy which renews our relationship with nature and makes full use of nature-based solutions to chart a safe passage for the global environment and economy. All of the science proves that nature is one of the most powerful medicines we have. Not only do plants actually provide us with many of the medicines we buy in the pharmacy, but children especially, and people generally, who have easy access to nature, be it in urban parks or natural protected areas, have fewer issues with allergies, lower blood pressure, fewer psychological issues, and are generally healthier, reducing health bills for governments and improving people's lives. As a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, we believe that the benefit of protecting at least 30% of our land and ocean will go beyond biodiversity. It will improve our quality of life, our economies, our health, and our development. Gabon, under the leadership of President Ali Bongo Ondimba, remains committed to the adoption of bold and unprecedented measures to protect Mother Nature and thereby to protect our health. Thank you.
So very much. I mean, you've really wonderfully articulated the value of this the natural environment and phytopharmacies, as it were. And I know that you were involved in the summit last year, as Dr. Navarro alluded to that in relation to nature-based solutions for humanity. How do you think nature-based solutions can contribute to a sustainable world?
I mean, nature-based solutions. We talk about this renewed relationship with nature by creating a new relationship with nature, by nurturing rather than destroying nature. We're going to reduce the chances of another pandemic like the one that we've just lived through. We've been through an HIV pandemic that came from nature. We've been through other pandemics, and so creating this new relationship, making nature work for us, making nature fight against climate change, making nature work for us as we try to minimize the chances of future pandemics is really the way to go.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Minister White. I'd like to now invite Dr. Peter Dashak, who's the president of the Eco Health Alliance. Dr. Dashak, I understand that you do have a slide to share with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be here. And this is a critical moment in our history. Please show the first slide. I want to talk about where the pandemics come from. And the origins of pandemics are in biodiversity. Animals around the world carry viruses and microbes that often don't affect them very much, but if they get into our populations, can cause problems. Now, in a natural situation, we don't come across new emerging viruses like SARS coronavirus 2 that causes COVID. What's happening around the world, as we all know, is an unsustainable overconsumption that's driving global environmental change, land use change, deforestation, building roads and encroaching into more wilderness areas, coming across wildlife, hunting and consuming and trading wildlife on an unprecedented scale, often driven by overconsumption in the richer countries around the world. Agricultural expansion, the globalization of agricultural production, and climate change. The important thing is we are now seeing strong links between these ecological changes and our health. They also cause biodiversity loss, and conservationists have been talking about them for decades. The two can work together. And if we work for transformative change, the sort of change that IPBES is calling for in its global assessment, we will be able to reduce pandemic risk and conserve biodiversity. And we'll get an incredible return on investment for those programs. Now, pandemics are increasing over time. Our work has shown that. Next slide, please. We're able to predict, looking at trends in pandemics, not only that they're increasing in frequency, we're going to see them come more often. We're going to see them spread more quickly. They're going to kill more people like COVID because we rely so heavily on our connections around the world, and that's how viruses spread. They're also going to crash our economies more quickly. But the good news, this is a doom and gloom scenario that we're living in right now, the pandemic era, as Dr. Navarro said. But the good news is we understand that we're the cause of this. Human activities that are unsustainable anyway are driving this. That gives us the power to make change. It gives us, everyone around the world, whether you're in the private sector and you're making a profit from global trade, you can do it in a more sustainable way. If you lead that sector, you will get the green economy supporting you. If you're a private citizen in Europe or US, you can make a consumer choice on the products you buy that reduce your global footprint, reduce pandemic risk, and reduce biodiversity loss. Some of the ways we can do this are by simple activities like protecting protected areas, working with indigenous peoples and their land rights around the world to support their work to protect protected areas, to reduce encroachment into the biodiverse habitats. It will stop viruses getting into human populations. We estimate approximately 5 new emerging disease events will happen every year, and that's increasing. The map I showed is of the global hotspots for emerging diseases where we expect these new pandemics to come from. You can see that Southeast Asia, Central Africa, and Latin America are hotspots. If we continue business as usual, we will see more. And again, Europe and North America aren't out of this either. We drive drug-resistant microbes and foodborne infections. So I want to just finish by saying the transformative change is here. We are living in a pandemic where vaccines and drugs are not yet available. Our reliance on vaccine and drug technology is important, but it isn't the solution for pandemics that are coming more frequently and spreading within weeks of them emerging, wherever they emerge around the planet. We need to prevent pandemics. We need to work with our consumption habits. We need to work with better prevention strategies at the UN system level. And we need to look at the economic return on investment, which we estimate can be as high as 10 to 1 when pandemics cost trillions of dollars. Our future projections are $30 to $40 trillion of pandemic cost, pandemic shock to the system over the next 20 to 30 years. And COVID shows us that they may be way underestimates. So valuing nature and reassessing our relationship with nature not only will protect our health, it will protect our planet's health and our biodiversity and save us money. There could not be a stronger argument for that. And I fully endorse what's happening today with UNDP and what's happening globally around the world with this new movement to prevent pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for that intervention. I have a question for you, and I'm quite curious. You did mention in your intervention that Southeast Asia and Africa as hotspots, and possibly even parts of Latin America. I'm quite curious to find out from you, how can we finance programs that prevent pandemics?
Yeah, look, the reason why these hotspots exist is not because things are going on in those regions that drive it. Well, they are all around the world, but it's really because of the biodiversity that's there. Wildlife carry viruses and other microbes that if we interact in the wrong way with them will lead to pandemics. So look, I think that the countries that have the most to lose when a pandemic hits are the ones that depend on globalized economies to the greatest degree. The richer countries around the world, we should be looking to ensure our own globalized economies against this extrinsic risk. And private sector can help, insurance can help, the travel trade stands a lot to lose when pandemics hit. We've seen closing of hospitals and airlines. So we need to fund this, but we need to recognize the return on investment of supporting programs in countries on the front line of pandemics, like the hotspots you talked about, will provide an incredible return to all of us, including those in the richer countries that need to support this.
Well, thank you so very much for that intervention. So next on the panel is Mr. Christian Waltzer, who is the Executive Director for the Global Health part of Wildlife Conservation Society. And as we know, this amazing organization does incredible work in conservation. And as part of a panelist to discuss prevention of pandemics, would like to hear from you, Mr. Waltzer, in terms of what the Wildlife Conservation Society is doing towards this cause.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. So obviously, building on what the speaker said before, the world is in turmoil. A novel coronavirus has catapulted across the ever-evolving interface between humans and wild places and relentlessly spread coronavirus disease among humans, bringing immense suffering, death to the outermost reaches of our planet. to an extent that definitely surprised, I think, each and every one of us. It was immediately apparent that the virus responsible for this outbreak originated at some point in time in wild animals. A wildlife source, as Peter just said, is not a surprise, as the majority of the emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic, and 2/3 of them have their origin in wildlife. However, it is important to be absolutely clear. It is not about bat soups, pangolins, or specific viruses at all. It's about our interactions, the exploitation and the destruction of nature. It's about the interfaces, these edges of destruction where humans, wildlife, and nature interact. One of these interfaces I want to really highlight is the commercial use of wildlife for consumption, which encompasses both legal and illegal trade, is poorly regulated with porous boundaries between these entities. This trade, particularly in live animals, creates super interfaces along the food value chain by commingling species from many different geographies and habitats, creating perfect conditions for the exchange and recombination of novel viruses. Basically, what you're creating with these live animal markets is a cauldron of contagion. Since the 2002 SARS outbreak, there's been broad scientific consensus that long-term structural changes in the wildlife trade with market closures are going to be necessary to prevent these future epidemics. Unfortunately, we obviously did not heed this advice. So today, the most cost-effective and pragmatic action governments can take with immediate effect is to ban the commercial, and I want to reiterate, the commercial trade of wild animals for consumption. Most importantly, it not only reduces the risk for future zoonotic transmission, but it also safeguards the resources for those indigenous peoples and local communities that rely on wild meat to meet their nutritional requirements. So basically, in summary, viral species switching and spillover events into humans are simple. It all comes down to a number game. The more often we force conditions that increase this direct contact between wildlife and humans, the higher the likelihood of another spillover event. So along with climate change, biodiversity loss, COVID-19 is just another symptom of ailing planetary health and starkly reminds us of the basic fact: human, animal, plant, and environmental health and well-being are all intrinsically connected. And we need to be radical in the true sense of the word. We must move beyond simplistic, symptomatic treatments and boldly address the root causes of our ailing planet. We need to stop discounting nature and irrevocably accept that nature is not and can never be considered a cheap externality. The quality of our current and future human and animal health and well-being are absolutely dependent on our respectful, humble, and responsible environmental stewardship. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much for that intervention. Unfortunately, we have to move on promptly to the next speaker right now, who happens to be Mr. Qatar Roberts, who is the president and CEO of WWF US. Mr. Roberts, welcome. I know that WWF has been doing such incredible work around sort of the natural infrastructure and really looking at the implications of ecosystem degradation. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. The speakers have already identified there are three main drivers of these spillover events. One being the growth of infrastructure, the other one being wildlife trade, and the last one being the intensification of agriculture. And the estimates are that spillover events have actually tripled over the past decade. And you've already heard that we're looking for those to accelerate based on what's happening in the world today. I wanted to focus first on infrastructure. In the Amazon itself, 95% of deforestation occurred within 5 kilometers of a road. And deforestation increased by 55% this past year. And there's urgency to getting infrastructure right. The estimates are we're going to need $90 trillion in investments of infrastructure between now and 2030 to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and to support an expanding human population around the world. The reasons for doing that are obvious. We need it to bring food, electricity, and markets to rural populations. But we also know that infrastructure, if done, planned badly, executed badly, will result in destroying nature, destroying ecosystems, and sowing the seeds of our own destruction, where the possible benefits of infrastructure are outweighed by the costs. Now, the way to get that right in areas in which WWF has been deeply, deeply involved has been to work to get upstream in the planning with the right kind of system level approach to infrastructure. Investors matter a lot. And I would just point to the climate finance leadership initiative that's led by Bloomberg, facilitated by the Albright Stonebridge Group, that is working on the kind of signals investors can send. It also matters that we have the right kind of tools and metrics for investors to evaluate sustainability and measure it over time. Just this week, WWF produced a report with Guggenheim Partners on what's needed on that front. But it's also important to remember infrastructure is often built to bring food to the growing populations of people around the world. And food, the industrial agricultural sector, is the leading cause of forest destruction worldwide. It also is absolutely essential to people. There are the right ways to do this and the less sustainable ways of do this. And the more sustainable ways involve governments working with businesses to focus on regenerative agriculture and moving new production to degraded lands. The last thing I just want to say is nature's alarm bells are ringing. We know from the reports of the impacts on climate change and the impacts of the destruction of nature that our futures are very much at risk. And we can now add zoonotic diseases and plagues to nature's invoice to humanity. And it's clear right now that we need to repair our relationship with nature. And we need to do so not just for nature's sake, but for the future of our economies and for the future of our families and our livelihoods over the very long term.
Well, thank you so very much for that. Nature's invoice to humanity. That is really a poignant one. I really want to sincerely thank you and the other speakers for this panel. And we're now going to be moving on to the next session. I want to remind everyone around the world that you are welcome to send in your questions, and we're going to be answering some questions at a later stage. We're now moving to the second session, which is entitled Nature for Healthy and Sustainable Food Systems. Very thing that you're probably having for dinner, or you've had for lunch, or you're having for breakfast, wherever you are in the world. And without further ado, we have an amazing panel. We have His Excellency, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, who is the Minister of Planning of the Government of India. I'd like to welcome you, Minister Kumar. Do we have Minister Kumar? Okay, and the next speaker on this panel, I'll introduce all the speakers. We have Her Excellency Ms. Isabella Teixeira, who is from Brazil and also was a recipient of the Champions of the Earth, an amazing and wonderful woman, a former Minister of Environment for the government of Brazil. We also have another speaker. Her name is Ms. Renu Mittal, who is the program officer at the Environment Programs Ocean Initiative Walton Family Foundation. And we also do have a video message recording from the government of Nigeria by Mr. Alede Adeleke, who is the Director of Environment and Management and Development Trust of Nigeria. And lastly, but not the least on that panel, we're going to have Ms. Bambi Semrock, who is coming from Conservation International, is the Vice President of Sustainable Markets and Strategy, Sustainable Coffee Challenge. I'm so looking forward to these exciting discussions and hearing all things about food, because I do love to cook, actually. I want to hear about the sustainability of these systems and why they matter in the context of nature and how we can live sustainably. If Mr. Kumar is available, His Excellency.
Before having Mr. Kumar join us, we are going to play a short video.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll have a short video.
I wish to congratulate the organizers of the Nature for Life Hub this year, most especially for the invitation extended to the Environmental Management and Development Trust Nigeria. Environmental Management and Development Trust Nigeria focuses on agroforestry because of the inextricable linkage it has between agricultural land use and the environment, and the connectivity that it has with sustainable livelihoods in communities. Sustainable food systems is critical because it provides opportunity for nature's ability to support human communities by providing nutritious food materials, and sometimes those that are connected with human health. In our own case, we focus on a herbaceous plant called Tomatococcus danieli, which grows in cocoa agroforestry floors and also grow in natural environment around cocoa agroforests. Tomatococcus danieli provides job and occupation for women who trades on the leaf. The leaf is used for packaging local food in southwestern part of Nigeria. In recent years, in the past 10-15 years, there has been increase in the use of nylon and plastics for packaging local food in southwestern Nigeria. The project of EMADET, Environmental Management and Development Trust, promotes the advocacy of increasing and encouraging communities to use more of the Tomatococcus danieli leaves for packaging local food. During the COVID-19 pandemic, our women traders who normally go to far distances to buy the Tomatococcus danieli leaves found it difficult to go out, and that made them to design a methodology of planting the seedlings of Tomatococcus danieli leaves that they have in their households, in home gardens, and around the villages. These became a kind of adaptation and a resilience method, which is now going to be used to encourage and plant more of the Tomatococcus danieli leaves around home gardens. The lesson learned from this and the need for natural products to support human communities is an important thing that we wish to share with other communities, not only in Nigeria, but everywhere around the world. Thank you very much.
That was Mr. Alade Adeleke from Nigeria telling us about what's happening there in this pandemic and how women are doing all they are in planting. Without further ado, I'd like to now go to Ms. Isabella Teixeira, who is from Brazil, to really tell us, how we can be transformative around our food systems. Ms. Isabella, over to you.
Thank you very much, Musonda. Nice to see you again. I'd like here to highlight 2 points considering how nature can help us. If you want to be transformative, you need nature help. And my focus would be on how to create sustainable food systems. 2 points to be considered in consider political perspectives. The first one, that sustainability today means to put natural capital, environmental service, nature assets in the political and the economic perspectives. And it's not only to bring things together, the 3 pillars that in the past we have sustainable development, but also we need to understand that nature cries today, like climate change, biodiversity loss, and natural resource unsustainable and efficient use bring us together. And it means that the global needs and the local needs come together. Okay, so the interconnectivity between the societies is strategic as a geopolitical and geoeconomic approach. What it means that we need environmental health systems to allow global development. My second point is exactly how food as a key issue to address economic and social assets indeed play an important role. Why? Because we need to face the social and economic tipping points, not only the environmental tipping points. And so we have inequalities now, social inequality so deep. We have human rights demands, we have economic informalities. So it's imperative to achieve more global commitments to sustainable food. And how we can approach this is in an innovative way. We have been working together in International Resource Panel for UNEP and also UN Planet initiative. We will present this next to NEA 5, how we can bring value food supply chains into the game or into the world. So the importance of a transformative paradigm shift to approach food sustainability, food safety, and food security. What indeed we need, a comprehensive overview of natural resource use and environmental impacts across global food systems, catalyze science-based policy action and consider sustainable and consumption behaviors. So why it's important? Because common lives rights, not only human rights, okay? And if we're discussing the planet and the limits of the planet. So we share not only rights, but also responsibilities if we want a fair and inclusive development. Co-responsibility brings government, business, society, and consumers together. So if we go into new lifestyles, if we go in new quality of life, indeed, we need better choice on food systems to allow environmental health systems and inclusive, fair, and sustainable global development. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada. That was really fantastic, and really also your connection to the UN Environment Assembly 5, which is happening next year in connecting nature and sustainable development goals. I would like to now call on Dr. Kumar from the Government of India. Dr. Kumar, please. We have Dr. Rajiv Kumar.
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Mumba. How are you?
I am very well. I'm very well.
Wonderful to be here.
I understand amazing things have been happening in India. You have over 2 million farmers who decided to go and do regenerative agriculture, and the ambition is to reach 140 million farmers. Can you tell us about this?
Yes, surely. I mean, I think the first thing that I like to say that we now we need to update our numbers, and we are close to 5 million already farmers who have adopted regenerative farming, which we in this part of the world, in India, we call it natural farming or chemical-free farming. And this has been an amazing movement which is catching on in all over the country. Already in about 8 provinces we have these farmers and these experiments going on. Dr. Mumba, I want to emphasize to begin with that this particular movement is a really very tangible, successful response to the 2 existential questions that we are facing today in the world, and especially in the emerging economies. The first one is that in the emerging economies, the farmers, the small and marginal farmers especially, cannot adopt industrial farming because they don't have vast amounts of land holdings, which is the necessary condition for industrial farming. Plus, also they don't have the financial resources to be able to acquire all the inputs that they need, and as a result of which they are getting impoverished, they're getting indebted, and hordes of them are leaving the farming profession, and especially generation after generation, the villages are getting denuded and migrating to the urban slums, and therefore a real loss of welfare for these communities. And that really is a existential question facing the farming community. And we in India have 120 million farming households, and we need an answer for that. The second existential question that we have is about the planet itself, because where we are today with the carbon footprint, with the water emergency, with the health pandemics going on, with the rivers and the oceans getting polluted, we need to take steps to reverse that. And lo and behold, the agroecology, the regenerative farming, the chemical-free farming is an answer to that, because what we have experienced, and we've got data, we have increasing amounts of data to show that regenerative farming increases the organic soil carbon content in the soil, and which it fixes from the environment. So it takes the carbon from the environment and brings it back to the land from where it has been taken away by the use of all these inorganic chemicals. And second most important is that it starts fixing the moisture, because of the humus that you create in the soil. It uses the water in the environment, which again is 7 times the amount of water on the surface and in the underground, and uses that to nourish the crops and the horticulture and the plants, etc. So that the water usage and the exploitation of groundwater goes down by almost a fourth, if not more, in this. So both those massive environmental challenges are directly tackled and addressed by regenerative farming. Apart from that, what you have is that there are immense health benefits, because all the chemical contents that you get into our crops, into our food systems, into our fruit horticultural systems, they gradually get replaced by healthy, organic, non-chemical inputs, as a result of which the health indicators start looking very well. I'm very glad to tell you that in Andhra Pradesh, the state, it's one province itself, there are 2.2 million farmers, registered farmers, practicing this agriculture today. And the gentleman called Subhash Palekar is now on a crusade in India. The government of India is now actively supporting it. My own agency, NITI, the National Institute of Transforming India, is very active in supporting it. We have a very big webinar on the 29th and the 30th, where we will collect thousands of farmers through remote connectivity to explain to them the intricate details of this farming. And the government of India is committed to handhold these farmers through self-help groups to make the transition, because we think that this is the future, not just for India, but for the global community as well, because we have to move away from that style of agriculture which destroys our land and its fertility and restores to the land its original qualities of microbial activities, and all the nourishment being released from the soil through the activities of all these microorganisms there. So, in short, this is a revolution that is the call, that meets the call for the day, and I hope by practicing it at a much larger scale in India, we'll be able to put it up as an exemplar for the global community as a whole. Thank you very much for giving me that time.
No, thank you so very much for your intervention. As I've never been to India, I really would love to see all this work in Andhra Pradesh, because I've heard so much about it. Thank you. Would I like to move to Ms. Renu Mittal, who's working with the Walton Family Foundation. Ms. Mittal, we would like to find out from you, if you can kindly tell the world how seafood plays a role in securing planetary and human health.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today and to talk about this topic. I want to start off by asking a few questions, and I'm sure many of you here eat seafood, but do you know where it comes from? Do you take for granted the availability of seafood? Do you ask yourself, how does that fish get to your plate? Who was that fisher that caught that fish? Today, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how 3.1 billion people rely on fish for 20% of their daily protein intake, with some coastal communities reliant on fish for upwards of 70%. And as you know, and as you heard Dr. Kumar say, terrestrial food production has been and continues to be the largest driver of habitat and biodiversity loss on the planet. And agriculture is responsible for about a third of the global greenhouse gases. But wild-caught fish, they feed and grow in their own environment, therefore have the lowest climate impact than other animal proteins. So wild fish are the ultimate generative food production. If we limit what we take out to stay within the biological limits and maintain the health of marine habitats, wild fish will continue to thrive on their own, and they'll continue to provide us with food security, and nutritional source of food.
Well, thank you for that. But I'm also curious, since you're talking about, the value of seafood and the many small-scale farmers, how then, can these small-scale fisheries, how can small-scale fisheries be supported? And also, how is it, what role does it play in this global food source?
Thank you for asking that question. It's really important to acknowledge the role that coastal communities, or we also call them small-scale fishers, play in managing fisheries. It is their livelihood. They provide 45% of the global fish production, of which 2/3 go to direct human consumption. And if we do not support these communities, helping them maintain these fisheries by providing them access to fair markets, good science, strong governance, and we respect their traditional knowledge in managing fisheries, then we are doing a disservice to them and the environment, and again, to our food security. We need to recognize also, the impacts that climate change have for these communities. Water rising, communities are being displaced from their homes, overfishing by large industrial boats. They're causing them to fish further out to sea in unsafe waters, warming waters, causing fish to migrate to other regions. I mean, this can continue. I can share so many, different impacts that these communities have, and these communities, provide us with the fish that we need, and for our food security. But I think one more thing to really recognize is the role that women play in the fishery sector. Women make up about 50% of the labor force for fish, but they're never brought to the table to discuss management issues. And as we continue to work to improve the management of our fisheries, if communities and even more women are not at the table and are partners for the solution, then it'll be challenging to ensure availability of fish for generations to come. We need to make sure we are inclusive in our approach and promote gender equity as part of the solution. It's a simple message. Well-managed fish stocks and marine habitats taking an inclusive and equitable approach means that oceans can increase the amount of fish we can sustainably take out by anywhere between 36% to 71%. So ask yourself the next time you eat fish, was it caught sustainably? And who was on the other side? Who was that fisher that caught your fish? Thank you.
Thank you. But I for you, I'm just kind of curious in terms of how you make, this small scale fisheries more inclusive, as you alluded to. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's, the work at Walton Family Foundation, we work with small scale fishers, we work with industry, and when you have these conversations, all stakeholders need to be at the table. If they're not, it's hard for them to have that buy-in to maybe improve the way they manage their fisheries. They need to be part of that decision making. They can't be left out and then told, here, go do this. You really have to include them. And we're starting to see that community-based approaches, having that co-management approach is how you're going to be able to manage fisheries better.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. Our next speaker comes from Conservation International, and she's a vice president on sustainable markets and strategy and focuses on what's called the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. I love coffee. So I would love to hear from you, Ms. Bambi Samrock, really in terms of, how coffee is relevant discussion today in the conversation around health and nature. And we've just listened to what Ms. Mittal has talked about, small scale farmers and community, and really, so how do you see coffee as a disruptor in that sense, especially within the climate change discourse?
Thank you so much, Masunda. It's a pleasure to be here. We all know that coffee boosts our energy in the mornings and contributes to our overall health in that way. It keeps us running. Fortunately, more recent studies are showing the health benefits from coffee consumption, everything from helping to fight Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease to actually certain forms of cancer as well. Unfortunately, I don't drink coffee. I'm glad that you do. So I'm not getting those benefits, but I really hope that you and all of our audience are. But on a more serious note, coffee also contributes to our planet's overall health, including that of our climate. Coffee is usually grown in and around important areas for conservation, it helps protect biodiversity. And in doing so, in protecting those forests, it helps promote a stable climate for our health and our wellness. And then income from sustainable coffee supports the livelihoods of about 10 million coffee farmers and farmer families around the world. It's a tree crop that can grow under the shade of other trees, often, like I said, in and around these important areas for conservation. And actually, this makes it an important natural climate solution. It's grown in about 10 million hectares worldwide. And as more and more people are finding a taste for coffee, we actually could need to double production in the next 30 years to meet future demand. That could mean an additional 10 million hectares of land needed if we can't increase production on our existing coffee farms. And if we can do that effectively, if we can increase production on existing farms, we can actually potentially secure over 1.5 gigatons of carbon through the coffee sector alone. And so when coffee farming is done sustainably, it actually invests in nature conservation, and it helps protect us from future pandemics like the one that we're in. A recent study that was co-authored by some colleagues at Conservation International found that the world could lose about $5 trillion in GDP this year from the COVID crisis alone. In contrast, they found that prevention of forest degradation, forest loss, and improvement in terms of wildlife trade regulation would cost about $22 to $31 billion per year. And so we know that what we need to do, we know that we need to invest in these agricultural commodities that can really be part of the solution. And we know that coffee can be part of that, that success story. And so what are we doing at Conservation International to help disrupt, and have coffee help disrupt climate change? It's really that we believe that coffee can be an example of how a tree crop can help disrupt climate change. In 2015, at the Paris climate meetings, we launched what we called the Sustainable Coffee Challenge with about 18 partners. And we had the mission of trying to make coffee the world's first sustainable agricultural product. Today, 5 years later, we have over 155 partners working with us to achieve this vision. And our latest disruption has been to really recognize the role that coffee farming can play in the fight against climate change. To not just think about coffee as a victim of climate change, of how changing temperatures, changing weather patterns are going to make it more difficult to grow coffee, but really trying to think about how can we leverage the knowledge, the insight, the stewardship that coffee farmers are, that they're doing every day to actually benefit our climate and to benefit nature more broadly. And so in order to do that, we have to double down on sustainable coffee production on our existing lands. We need to improve shade systems, make sure they're storing more carbon, integrate other agroforestry practices like windbreaks, live fencing to the extent possible. And we know that if we can do this with the smaller farmers who produce the majority of the coffee worldwide, we could actually secure at least 1.5 gigatons of carbon by mid-century. And so these 155 partners in the Sustainable Coffee Challenge are committed to the sustainable future. We're really excited to be moving forward together on this agenda so we can actually build a resilient coffee system that really serves as this important natural climate solution. We invite others to join us in this effort, really trying to keep the world caffeinated and a lot cooler together. Thank you so much.
So very much. And really, thank you so much for really highlighting the importance of these landscapes and considering that, the more degraded the landscapes are, the more less productive they are. And coffee as a shade plant really does require, other tree species around it. We've had quite some questions that are popping in, and perhaps maybe in the interest of time, just one quick question for you, Bambi, in terms of, how can we ensure sustainable food systems and support local business owners, particularly in urban areas? Would you have any thoughts to that?
In urban areas, definitely, I think that it's about trying to do more gardening in urban areas, but I think it's about really linking urban areas to these rural areas that are producing the food and the agricultural products that they're relying upon. If you own a restaurant, a cafe, you're purchasing things from another part of your country or even overseas. Mm-hmm. You need to understand where that's coming from, how it's produced, and be promoting and incentivizing these sustainable agricultural practices like my fellow panelists have discussed as well.
Great. Well, thank you so very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just about to now move to our last and final segment. But before we do, I think I'll just very, very quickly start, quick summary really in terms of what you've been hearing. For those of you joining us right now, we've just had some exciting panelists and really exciting thought leaders. We started with a keynote speech that came through from Dr. David Nabarro. We need to value nature. And in fact, we need to value it together. And I think this pandemic has taught us so much, the need to really move in a direction where we do this collectively as humans. And also we heard from the first segment that was focusing on stopping the pandemic. Oh, listening in from, Minister White, for example, who's in the Congo Basin in Gabon, really talking about how we've seen viruses emerge from these forests and what we need to do differently. Nature-based solutions are central. And we listened to Eco Health Alliance, and Dr. Waltzer really brought in the importance of making sure that our spaces are healthy. We manage our ecological spaces in a healthy way. Lastly, but not the least, Mr. Carter really brought it all together to say we need to stop this pandemic, and nature has issued us an invoice, and we're paying the price for that. This last session, you all heard about the importance of sustainable food systems. I think it's really wonderful. And now we're going to go into this last panel that really now talks about the importance of well-being, our very existence. How can we be grateful to nature? And also, how can we use nature to reduce risks? Without further ado, I would like to introduce the Deputy Mayor of London, Ms. Shirley Rodriguez, who's going to be joining us, and a city that I lived in for 7 years, and I absolutely love, London. Really would like to hear from you about greening of urban spaces, because other than having lived in this green city, I moved to another green city called Nairobi. Would like to hear about, the urgency of rebuilding the city economy post the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumba. And thank you for asking me to address this very important event, and to all the other speakers for their insightful contributions. In London, we're very fortunate that the vast majority of people don't have to face the challenges of securing access to clean drinking water and basic healthy nutrition. We're a very green city with an extensive network of parks and really good policies on nature and the environment. And like many developed cities, the focus has been on problems associated with a strong economy, unhealthy diets, toxic air pollution, for example, that's caused by the rise in motor vehicles. But the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has done a considerable amount to address both of these issues. We have the world's first ultra-low emission zone, for example. But the COVID pandemic has changed this focus. It has changed this focus for all of us. It has shown the importance of our environment. Our parks and green spaces have been a haven for many people, and has highlighted, often for the very first time, the natural environment and wildlife on our doorsteps in our cities. And the pandemic has also brought into sharp focus the hidden inequalities, such as the lack of access to green space for many of our people. And people have experienced this during lockdown. For example, our data has shown that younger, more affluent Londoners have used parks much more than those in lower socioeconomic groups, and who are disadvantaged in many other ways. And alongside of this, we're seeing everyday new evidence, overwhelming evidence of the human impacts on nature and environment. And that's why the Mayor has declared a climate and ecological emergency. And that's why we're redoubling our efforts to provide access to green space and nature for all Londoners, and tackling our toxic air pollution. And we're looking to make sure this really helps the most vulnerable. And this work is part of our work to ensure that London's recovery from the impacts of COVID-19 on our economy and our society is a green one. And this is because of the undeniable health benefits of outdoor exercise and contact with nature. Health benefits, both physical and mental health benefits, that have an economic outcome too. Our natural capital account for London has revealed that accessible green space and contact with nature provides £950 million worth, almost £1 billion, of avoided healthcare costs. And whilst we may not be able to ensure that every citizen has easy access to green space, although we're striving to achieve this where possible, we're working to ensure that the benefits of nature and environment are seen on people's doorsteps by incorporating that into green infrastructure on their immediate locale. The Mayor has set an innovative urban greening policy, which will require all new development to include more pocket parks, street trees, and green roofs. Our Healthy Streets approach is creating greener, more active travel, more livable streets, no longer dominated by traffic. And this means that this will result in better health, reduced pollution, and greener neighbourhoods. There's a long way to go on our journey, and it challenges some really hardwired views by some citizens about how a city should function and their use of the private car. But the Mayor is clear, we cannot go back to business as usual. We need to foster a systemic change as part of London's recovery plans. Accelerating the greening of our cities is not just a COVID recovery response, but a fundamental addressing of social justice issues and a necessary preparation for the more profound health impacts of a changing climate. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much. And it's really great to hear about all those incredible initiatives and how the Mayor and yourself are really working towards making sure that the natural environment is embraced and also as part of the recovery process. I just want to bring on Dr. Laura Fleming, who happens to be a physician and epidemiologist with Oceans and Human Health with the European Centre for Environment and Human Health. So, Dr. Laura Fleming, welcome. This is so exciting. You know, when I read your profile and also read about the sea and you talking about blue spaces, you know, every time we talk about the health and healing green spaces, we want to hear about the power of these blue spaces, the power of the ocean, how this interaction of these open spaces are so pivotal to human health and our very well-being.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumba, and also the Deputy Mayor. You've really set me up to be able to talk a little bit about research that we've been doing with people around the world, other researchers and community groups, that shows that interacting with blue environments in particular, as well as green environments, are good for our physical health and our mental well-being. We actually have evidence to show this. And interestingly enough, in the UK and other parts of Europe, that's particularly true for people of lower socioeconomic class, particularly if they can have access to high quality blue and green spaces. And I think the whole issue of equity, which has been raised by both of you, is incredibly important going forward. It's not just equity of access, it's equity of access to high quality blue and green environments. And if we look beyond into the lower and middle income countries, some of the poorest people actually live along the coasts currently. And I think there's a huge amount of work to be done because they are at great threat to things like climate change from sea level rise, the decreasing amount of seafood, et cetera. And it would be wonderful if we could work with communities around the world so that they could actually enjoy the benefits of interacting in terms of health and well-being with blue environments as well as green environments. And I guess my last statement would be, it's incredibly important that we do this on a community basis. And I just wanted to thank the organizers for this opportunity to talk about this area.
So much for that. And I have an additional question for you. You mentioned, obviously, in your statement that, you know, some of the poorest people live along these very sort of fragile ecosystems and are more susceptible, particularly to the impacts of climate change, which we've seen in small island developing states or coastal regions. I mean, let's just talk about, you know, places like Florida, for example. So in terms of the importance of the ocean landscape to communities, how can people, also local people, be involved or engaged in part of this sort of engagement around the well-being of this landscape?
Well, I think part of it is realizing what an incredible resource they have. And so obviously people understand who live off the ocean, that they get their food from it. They have their livelihoods from it. They have their culture and history from it. But I think maybe some of this research that we've been doing that actually shows that, particularly with high quality blue and green environments, that interacting with them is good for your physical health and your mental health, particularly for children, for example. I think if that kind of message can be used, I also think there'd be a piece of valuing that more. And also, I think sharing experiences among communities around the world. There's an interesting initiative called the Blue Climate Initiative, which is going to be trying to link up communities around the world of all sizes to try and do work in this area to both conserve, preserve, and live in a more positive interaction with nature, as some of your earlier speakers have already been talking about.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
The Blue Climate Initiative, that sounds very, very exciting. I really want to thank you, everyone around the world who's sending in questions. We will try and address some of those questions shortly. Right now, we do have the final speaker, who happens to be Mr. Richard Ellis from the Walgreens and Boots Alliance. This is so exciting. This huge and global alliance that's been working on, different models of businesses, but also the corporate social responsibility and really the sustainability of your work that you do. So I'm very curious to hear from you on how businesses, really global businesses, can help, support and also, intervene in some of the disasters that happen.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for the kind invitation to present and say a few words this afternoon. I think because of climate change, which has been caused by our treatment of the planet, natural disasters such as hurricanes and bushfires are becoming more common and more severe. Events such as Hurricane Harvey are no longer the once-in-a-century event that they were. They're happening every year. So we as businesses must be always preparing for them, not simply reacting when they occur. So what are we doing at Walgreens Boots Alliance to reduce the risk of these natural disasters? I think like all businesses, we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint and protect the biodiversity of the planet. But we also believe that we should be responding to the challenges presented by these natural and man-made disasters by using the skills that we have as a business. One of the key things that we believe in is the circular economy. So from our point of view, we are donating any product that we can't sell for whatever reason to a number of humanitarian charities. So in Europe, we work with IHP, International Health Partners. We donate product to them. It's stored at an airport on the outskirts of London, put into pallets, so that whenever a disaster is predicted, the pallets can be wheeled out, an aircraft hired, and those products can be sent almost before the disaster has struck. The next thing is our people. They want to help and support when disasters strike. So we train up our pharmacists so that they can go into areas and support health workers. We give them a trunk of medicines and they go in and first thing they do is vaccinations to the emergency workers to make sure that they can carry on and do all of the much needed work that they're undertaking. Then we've got pop-up pharmacists so that people in a ravaged area are able to get access to the life-saving drugs which are so vital to their lives. And finally, there's collaboration with others. Walgreens is based in Chicago, as is United Airlines. So we provide the supplies, we provide the health products, and United provide the air transport. So I guess it's the 4 Ps. It's about product, it's about people, it's about the pop-up pharmacies, and it's about partnership with other businesses. And I think that the biggest lesson that we can all learn is that we on our own can't solve these problems that are caused by natural disasters, but working collaboratively with a whole series of other businesses and agencies, we can make a difference.
There's always been a lot of criticism to businesses, particularly, businesses around the exploitation of workers in the developing world. So how does Walgreens and Boots Alliance actually tackle this issue?
It's been very much a part of the fabric of the business for 30 years. What we've done is take the United Kingdom's modern day slavery practices and applied them across our whole business. If it's good enough for the UK, then it's good enough for any country in the world. And what we do is we publish the results of our audits, our factory inspections within our annual report, so that people can see those businesses that meet our standards, those where remedial action is necessary, and those where we've identified zero tolerance defects, where we have to suspend the relationship immediately until such time as further investigation is necessary. Mm-hmm. So at the heart of all of this, it's very clear that the same rules apply to workers wherever they are in the world.
Fantastic. Really good to hear that that's happening. Well, thank you so very much for that intervention. So we've now come to the end of all the 3 sessions, but we do have some questions from the audience, some of which are coming from YouTube, some are coming from Twitter. This is very exciting. I'd like to address this one question to Her Excellency Ms. Isabella Teixeira. There's a question that's come through from YouTube. That's the question is, how can we effectively communicate the value of nature for healthy and sustainable food systems, particularly to decision makers who can influence policy? No, that was actually that was directed. I understand that Ms. Isabella has left. We just have very general questions that are, if you do have an inclination to respond to that, that would be great.
Well, if it's about how do you get the community involved, I think it's absolutely critical that they're involved, as Professor Fleming said earlier. And the key thing is to go out to them. You've got to engage with the community who will tell you what is absolutely clear. You know, they are telling us in London, particularly in our polling, that the environment and respect for the environment and desire to do more on the environment is very high. They want to make sure that it's part of London's recovery efforts. They don't want to see this an additional thing. They want to see that as embedded in all of our work. And very little things are needed. You know, people want to do stuff on their doorstep to see their immediate neighbourhoods improved. So supporting them with funding, supporting them with the tools that they can talk to each other, and then that builds and fosters those sort of inclusive communities that will strengthen our city's resilience.
That's really, really wonderful. In fact, you actually do respond to one of the questions that just come in that was asking, you know, how do you perpetuate the joy of local green spaces? And that's really, really, really wonderful. How do you perpetuate the joy of blue spaces?
Well, I would say that our research shows that it's also really important to involve children and families. When you look at why people feel better and have better health and well-being from interacting with blue as well as green spaces, there's several different sort of routes. One of them is that people are more physically active in blue as well as green spaces. If you talk to children and families, they associate that time, particularly in more developed nations, with play, with interacting positively with their families. And also there's a whole sense of sort of restoring yourself, of relaxing, of sort of setting yourself down to be at a more calm way. And also there may be things even in the air, particularly in blue spaces, particularly in unpolluted blue spaces, where even the air may have beneficial effects just from inhaling it, but also looking and hearing and feeling it. So I think there's a whole piece of giving opportunities to people of all areas, all sectors, opportunities to interact with high quality blue and green environments. And the kind of work they're doing now in London is a piece of that. And then sharing that with other communities.
That's fantastic. Well, I have one last question, and this one is for you, Mr. Ellis. So they're just wondering in terms of, food systems and local businesses, how do you ensure that, these sustainable food systems and local businesses are working well, particularly within urban spaces. Is that something you could speak to?
I mean, I think that local communities are dependent upon all types of business. I think that we want to see thriving high streets, and thriving high streets mean that everybody benefits. I think it's been difficult during the COVID crisis because of lockdown, but I think from our point of view, we encourage our stores to work collaboratively with the other stores and businesses within their areas, so that the high street can become somewhere that people want to visit. And in wanting to visit, then everybody benefits.
Thank you so very much. I want to thank the three of you for really having stayed the course, and have a wonderful afternoon. And now we just start wrapping up, and I'm just going to very quickly summarize some of the conversations and the thoughts that have come from our amazing speakers that we've had today, this morning, this afternoon, and this evening. And we heard from the last panel on sustainable food systems, really the importance of making sure that our food systems are sustainable and are regenerative. And I think the actual intervention from Minister Kumar was very poignant in terms of how communities mobilize, and how the communities within Andhra Pradesh have now scaled up from something of 2 million to 5 million farmers, regenerative farmers. This is just amazing. And this one last panel really talking about the well-being on nature. I think a lot of studies are now beginning to show our relevance and connectivity to green spaces. And we heard from Ms. Rodriguez there, the Deputy Mayor of London, on how London is really trying to figure out, and the call for, to action by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, on why we need to have these spaces, and why, the residents and citizens of London are supposed to be using these spaces, but also the element of inclusivity and the importance of community. And if there's anything that also is important to learn, I think, from these discussions, is very much that there's the green space and there's the blue space, the seas that we see, the big blue sea, this part of the world that is so fundamental in managing our climate, our food systems, connecting to our food system, and really part of what makes the planet and this earth look so beautiful from above, from, beyond the sort of, actually from the satellites. In fact, I understand we're in the UN decade of oceans. This is absolutely amazing. In fact, we're also in the UN decade of family farms by FAO. And lastly, but not the least, we're also in the UN decade, which is going to be starting in 2021 on ecosystem restoration. That is going to align wonderfully with the last 10 years of the Sustainable Development Goals. And today, as it has been the Sustainable Development Goal Day and session 1.2, it's been amazing to look at the implications of health in relation to this pandemic. I really am so grateful for your time, for joining us, for listening in, for your questions, and we'll be responding to some of your questions on Twitter, on YouTube, and other platforms where you've sent the questions. I just want to sincerely thank you for watching and for just screening in and tuning in and contributing. But we also have to remember the change starts with you if we're going to avoid the next pandemic. And as we heard from Dr. Nabaru from the very beginning, he did say, let's try to get it right. And we should get it right this time round. Thank you so very much. Have a lovely morning, a lovely evening, and a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
What an amazing session on such an important topic. Please, everyone, take a quick break, stretch, go outside to be in nature for a few minutes, and meet us back here for our third session of the day, Nature for Water. You can find all sessions on the official UNDP Twitter account at UNDP Live and at natureforlifehub.org. Stay tuned for more.